Spectrum wants to hear your views. You can SMS at any time during the show. Type Spectrum, leave a space, type in your contribution and name, then send it to 7197. Your views, our interviews on Spectrum, Radio 1 FM 90.
Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90 is brought to you by Stanbic Bank.
Spectrum wants to hear your views. You can SMS at any time during the show. Type Spectrum, leave a space, type in your contribution and name, then send it to 7197. Your views, our interviews on Spectrum, Radio 1 FM 90.
A very warm welcome. This is Spectrum on Radio 1. I'm your host, Edmond Kizito. On Spectrum tonight, the state of human rights in Uganda. What is the latest from the Office of the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders? The quest for a better human rights situation in the world, and Uganda in particular, remains a daunting task requiring concerted efforts between governments, civil society, and the citizens. Among the key offices in the world today dealing with human rights issues is the Office of the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders. This office is charged with several responsibilities, but key among them is carrying out country visits, issuing reports about the situation on human rights in a given country, carrying out studies and research, on top of engaging in advocacy with the aim of making the situation better. The documents presented by this office, together with other actors in the field of human rights, form the basis of the United Nations periodic review for each UN member country to establish the situation of human rights in that specific country. The latest local and international publications connected to human rights paint a bad picture about the human rights situation in Uganda, basing mostly on the happenings during the walk-to-work protests that have happened since last year. The human rights record of Uganda remains a debatable matter, with those aggrieved accusing government of using extreme force to suppress freedoms. The government, on the other hand, says it's only using state agencies to ensure that order and peace prevail in the country. Now, this government recently hired an international company to try and improve Uganda's human rights image abroad, saying the walk-to-work protests had damaged this beloved country's chances of attracting entry investments as well as tourists. Now, a Ugandan happens to hold the office of the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders, an assignment that ends in 2014. So tonight we share with you the findings of our office about the human rights situation in Uganda, as we also look at the roles played by this office. Our guest tonight is Miss Margaret Sekaggya, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders, also the Executive Director of the Human Rights Center in Uganda. You're most welcome, Madam Sekaggya.
Thank you very much.
Of course, you're a veteran human rights activist, having worked with the Uganda Human Rights Commission for many, many years. Now, you currently hold this UN office, and we know that your term expires in 2014. We'll know later whether you want to extend this term. But first of all, can you give us a background to your office? What do you do?
Yes. The position of the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders was established in 2000 after a long campaign and lobbying by human rights defenders for almost 14 years to get this position established. So it was established in 2000, and the first holder was Hina Jilani, who's a Pakistani, and she held the post for 7 years. This is a post which looks at the rights of human rights defenders all over the world, and by carrying out those activities which you enlisted, like country visits, issuing communications or urgent appeals, doing thematic studies, and issuing press releases. We then report to the Human Rights Council in Geneva or to the General Assembly in New York. We report once a year to the General Assembly and once a year to the Human Rights Council, giving the situation of human rights defenders in countries we would have visited, or from the thematic report we would have made. We also issue a communications report which enlists the situation of human rights defenders from all over the different countries which we would have monitored over that period.
When you talk of human rights defenders, who exactly are you talking about?
Human rights defenders, it could be anyone who strives or tries to promote, protect human rights, and this could include journalists, lawyers, judges, teachers, farmers, any individual, government officials, anyone who actually works to promote and protect human rights could be a human rights defender. But the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders defines it more and says anyone who carries out such activities of promotion and protection of human rights peacefully is a human rights defender.
You can't use violence to defend human rights.
Well, the UN Declaration talks about peaceful means of defending human rights.
All right, you've been there since 2007, I believe. 2008. Your term ends in 2014. That's a 7-year stretch.
That's 6 years.
6 years. Why 6 years? The first one was there 7 years.
3 years and then 3 years. When my predecessor took over office, they had not put term limits.
Oh.
But now they put term limits. So you do 3 years, renewable for another term of 3 years, and that's all.
You can't stay in, however much they like you.
No.
However much you like them.
No.
Well, term limits are an interesting topic in this country. You might have had or you might not have had, but let's not go into that at this stage. Talk to us, Madam Sekaggya, about how Ugandans can benefit from your office. You are Uganda. Next time they might give it to someone from Latin America or wherever.
Yes.
So between now and 2014, how can Ugandans benefit from this office?
First of all, when I took over this office, I realized that there was a gap. Especially within the Ugandan society, civil society, and other institutions in utilizing international mechanisms, in utilizing regional mechanisms. So the first thing I did was to set up a Human Rights Center, which could then carry out various activities to enlighten Ugandans. We do capacity building for human rights defenders, and we teach them about human rights, the United Nations mechanisms, the regional mechanisms like the African Commission, African Union mechanisms. And we also do look at legislation of Parliament to ensure that they comply with international standards as far as human rights defenders are concerned. We, besides doing capacity building, looking at the legislation, we also translate the various documents in local languages. So we have translated, for example, our Bill of Rights, which is our constitutional part of the Bill of Rights. We've simplified it, but we have also translated the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders into 7 local languages. And we have also translated the procedures for making allegations to my office into different languages. And we do that translation so that the local population can be able to access this information and understand it better. You know that most of these documents are put into very legal language, and it's difficult for people to understand. Besides that, then we do interactive dialogues, popularizing the mandate of the Special Rapporteur, telling people about what the UN does, what the Rapporteur does. And we do also talk about the human rights situation, for example, internationally, globally, for people to understand, yes, it's not only Uganda, but for example, in the Arab Spring or globally, the human rights situation is like this. Then in the interactive dialogue, we also talk about the human rights situation in Uganda, how is it? And then we talk about other issues. So these are some of the things we do, and I thought I'll bring it back home and translate my post into local initiatives which can help Ugandans to understand the international mechanism, that they are actually not only for international arena, but they can be translated into local situations and be utilized.
Right. Well, listeners, this is Spectrum on Radio 1. Tonight, the state of human rights in Uganda. What is the latest from the Office of the UN, that's the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders? Our guest is Ms. Margaret Sekaggya, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders, also the EDO, Executive Director of the Human Rights Center Uganda. She's a Ugandan who has this position now. She's been there since 2008. Before that, there was somebody from another country. After 2014, when her term ends, somebody else will take it over. So she's telling us tonight that we might as well make use of that office to promote human rights in this country. We'll hear from you about your own assessment of human rights in Uganda later. But first of all, one of your key responsibilities is to register complaints and violations. What kind of human right violations do you find most common?
We get human rights violations from different countries, and violations will be unique to each particular region. However, on the whole, we get issues like issues on freedom of expression, freedom of assembly and association, restriction for NGOs to register, restriction on NGOs to obtain foreign funding. We also get issues affecting sexual minorities. We get issues of women defenders whose rights have been violated. We get quite a number of complaints on criminalization, legislation which restrict freedom of expression, assembly, criminalization of the work of human rights defenders. We get all sorts of complaints from youth, from women, from different defenders, you name it. But as human rights defenders, as I said, is a wide subject. So we get these prominently. And also, we get issues of politicization and stigmatization of defenders, criminalization and imprisoning them for the work they do.
And the main perpetrators are the state, basically.
The main perpetrators are the state. But these days, it doesn't mean that non-state actors do not violate human rights. They actually do. So we deal both with the state as a major
and non-state perpetrators
and non-state actors. Because, for example, if your rights are violated by the media, that's a non-state actor. If it's a private media, that's a non-state actor, but they are violating.
They take a photograph of your house, which you built using private funds, and yet you're in a public office. Are they violating your human rights?
Let's get to that later. But I'm saying the media could be a tool used to violate people's rights, because you could invade their privacy, you could defame them, you could do whatever, you could do very negative things about human rights defenders. So non-state actors, even for example armed groups, they do violate rights.
They're non-state players.
They are non-state actors, but you can see that increasingly they are the ones who are actually committing violations to the extent of
mutilation. You're talking about LRA, mutilation, amputations, and so on.
Other areas, even if you go to Congo, there are non-state actors, there are militias and armed groups. You go to Darfur, all those areas, and then when you go down to
Nigeria, Boko Haram.
Yes, we go to America, you find the drug traffickers, killing people.
They used to have the Ku Klux Klan, the extreme, the white extremists.
That it's no longer the preserve of the state to violate rights, but even non-state actors at a very large extent.
Madam Sekaggya, let's talk about Uganda. Things seem to be getting strange. People seem to be, the state seems to be getting more impatient with the opposition. What's the human rights situation in Uganda in your reading?
At the moment, of course, if you start reviewing what had happened from last year, from the walk to work, it started emerging that the opposition, or let's say, even if we don't call it the opposition party, but the public and the opposition is getting in conflict with the state organs. And this is due to the following rights: freedom of assembly, freedom of association, freedom of expression. And this, as I said, under the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, they call them the core rights. The core rights of freedom of expression, assembly, access to information, all those have now culminated into a big factor in Uganda, which has brought up a big campaign, a big force within Uganda, and which has put the government, for people to call the government to account. And I think, in the normal sense, I think it's important for people to know that individuals, including human rights defenders, are free to hold the government accountable. The government has to account to the population. It has to explain things to the public. So they are called for accountability, for example. They are called for delivery of service. Is a normal call and a normal duty, especially for human rights defenders. So what I see now is this conflict should be should be worked on, in the sense that the government should understand its role. The role of the government
to protect,
first to protect
peace and sovereignty.
Yes, and also to protect human rights defenders. Two, to give space. You know what I mean by creating space. And three, to create an environment within which people can voice their concerns. So those are major issues, responsibilities of a government. Then, for the human rights defenders, they can hold the government to account where they are dissatisfied with the issues, with some of the actions of that government. And a government which doesn't have a civil society which is strong is not a state, because civil society and human rights defenders or political parties are all part of the state organs, which then must function. So we must ensure, we must make sure that these organs function. If you crush them, if you silence them, then you are not having a full state, as we will call it.
Well, but the opposition, you know very well, they interrupt the women selling their tomatoes at the roadside and other things. So why should they not be stopped?
Oh yes, the government also has the responsibility to protect everyone. So that's why I'm saying that it's important for this sort of what would I call it, the interventions which are being brought about, that it should be within the precepts of the law, so that even the women who are selling streets,
they're also protected.
They are also protected.
So how do they do it?
The government has a responsibility to protect every individual in this country, and even you, if you walked on the street and you are not protected.
You don't want to sniff tear gas. You want to clean fresh air on the streets.
Yes.
Well, but let's draw the line here. Who should stay at home? Is it the opposition politicians or what?
Who should do what?
Maybe the opposition politicians. Some people will say you should stay home and forget about these rallies. So there's peace for everyone, no tear gas and so on.
No, I've told you that a state is not a state
until you have
civil society.
There is
no civil society, where there are no other parties. Because we agreed that we are going to have a political party system.
Yes.
Therefore, it must function.
But they can speak on radio. We have 200 plus radio stations, 4 dozen television stations. Why don't they go to the studios and talk from there instead of going to the marketplaces?
I told you that core rights do not specify only speaking from radios, freedom of speech.
Oh, you reach more people. It's more peaceful, non-confrontational. You should be preaching that.
Freedom of assembly, freedom of assembly, association is also a right. It's also a right. And it's one of the avenues of taking messages to the people, of raising your concern. So I cannot say that let them stay home. They can go.
I don't have to say they can go to radio stations and speak out in the morning, lunchtime, evening. They are free. It's a free country.
I don't know whether that's what you want, but I'm saying those are all rights. I say the rights of freedom of assembly, association, even going on the street to talk is one of the rights.
So if they woke up tomorrow and held a rally in front of the central bank, stopping traffic on both sides, that's freedom.
No, I'm not saying you should do that. That's why I say it should be done in the precepts of the
Draw some lines for us. The police has allowed them to hold rallies in some places outside of town. When they come to town, that's when the boundaries are drawn.
Yeah, I think it's because they are saying they are interrupting traffic or business. So I think it's important, as I said, for the police and the opposition to get to a middle ground and agree. There can still be assemblies in the middle of the town.
Oh, really?
Which are
City
peaceful.
Square? They trample our flowers planted by such an investor?
Haven't you watched people holding placards, standing at any square with placards and just protesting?
But we've also seen what happened in Tahrir Square. You don't want that here.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying, why should it be violent? Let's not allow it to get violent. Let's keep peaceful for both sides. But anyone can stand anywhere peacefully and say something, and people listen and walk on. So I think the whole issue we need to discuss is why violence.
You don't think they'll burn tires in front of the city square? And they might want to camp there, prepare meals there. They don't want to go home after that.
If they do burn tires in front of city square, then they shouldn't. If you want to protest, then hold your placard, stand peacefully, pass your message.
So only people with placards should be allowed to the city square?
Not only placards, but I'm saying
megaphones.
I said the activity must be peaceful. Peaceful so that you do not disrupt the rights of others. That's why they talk about your rights stop
where the next man's rights come.
Yes. So if you are going to burn tires or you are going to
you should not be allowed.
Yes.
If you come with a truck full of tires.
But I think we can get a culture of understanding of how do we demand our rights.
All right. We'll talk about, I'd like you to talk to us about the guidelines for public assembly. We're going for a break though. When we come back, we'll talk about that. Do stay tuned. We have Margaret Sekaggya as our guest tonight talking about the state of human rights in Uganda. Do stay tuned.
Special fares to the US, London, China, and India, with extra baggage allowance on selected flights. To book your flight, contact your local travel agent or call us on 041-7800-900 or book online at qatarairways.com/UG. Qatar Airways, world's 5-star airline.
Terms and conditions apply.
Alive and free. I wanna be 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 alive and free. You and me.
Uganda Waraji, the spirit that binds us.
Strictly not for sale to persons under 18 years. Please drink responsibly.
Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90 is brought to you by Stanbic Bank.
Welcome back on Spectrum. Tonight, the state of human rights in Uganda. What is the latest from the Office of the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders? Our guest is Ms. Margaret Sekaggya, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders, also the Executive Director of the Human Rights Center Uganda. You'll be able to call in and contribute to this discussion. You can also send your messages via text. What you do is type the word Spectrum in your phone browsers, message, question or comment, and send it to 7197. That is Spectrum, message, question or comment, send it to 7197. Madam Sekaggya, we have guidelines not yet passed into law on public assembly. They were drafted when you were still at the Human Rights Commission, but some people think they are obnoxious. Why? Why did you draft such bad laws?
We actually initiated that process of drafting guidelines on freedom of assembly because I think, as you've realized in Uganda, this is one of the major issues which need to be resolved. So we started that process when I was there. Of course, started with consultations and getting the guidelines, but then when it comes into a law, it goes to another organization to translate it into a law, and they have to do more consultations, get more input. So I don't think the end product as such is that of the Uganda Human Rights Commission alone.
Other people inputted it, right?
Yes.
What percentage? 30% was yours, 70% theirs, or the other way around?
I can't tell now.
Well, they tell us only if you have a meeting of 3 people, you have to notify police. The Inspector General, not even the policeman on the street. The Inspector General has to know. If you have a 3, people meeting 3 of them.
I don't remember that provision when I was there. So these are some of the things which, have come in and which really I can't own.
And you don't agree with it?
I don't think 3 people is realistic. I mean, let's just be realistic. I think some of the things in the law have to be realistic, but that one is not realistic. 3 people is too small a group.
Why would they want to do it that way? Try to read their mind for us. What's up at the back of their mind? What they're not telling us?
I suppose it's a way of restricting political discussions.
Maybe they want a peaceful country, prosperous and peaceful. People don't argue too much.
Well, I can't read their mind. Let me not read their mind. But I think 3 people is unrealistic. But what we should emphasize is that can people demonstrate or assemble peacefully? I think that's the major factor. Can they do it peacefully without any violence and without really, I'm saying if it's the police, that could the police be there to protect them? That's what usually happens. The police will be there to protect the citizens as they express their wishes. And that's the role of the police.
Well, first of all, they have to keep the peace.
Yes, there is a conflict between keeping. It's not really a conflict, but I say you have to weigh keeping the peace and giving freedoms. So that's why we, all citizens of this country, have to understand these issues. We need to understand these issues.
Let's talk about the state of human rights defenders in Uganda. Has that department, to you borrow that term, grown? Do you think that sector has grown? Do we have enough enough defenders?
Yes, as I told you that
defenders who are aware of what they're supposed to be doing, not people drawing salaries.
What do you mean by people drawing salaries?
I start an NGO and HR put a big sign on the door, get money and do spreadsheets and send them back to wherever, and that's it. I don't actually do much work.
Yes, but I think we must appreciate that defenders or civil society has grown in this country, as you can see, and they are actually holding the government accountable on various issues.
Including oil?
Including oil, yes. Every issue, as I said, service delivery or whether corruption or oil, all those are matters of government for which you find that defenders will always ask for accountability.
So you think it's mature? They know what they're supposed to be doing?
Yes, I think we have quite strong civil society organizations. We have defenders who are doing it individually in their own right, but in Uganda it's mainly through civic civil society arrangements.
They're not careerists, drawing salaries, driving good cars.
Well, I don't.
Will you assess it for us? We need to know where we're going. Will they defend us or will they not?
But what have you accessed? Aren't they doing their work? Because what I see is that the civil society is doing its work, it's speaking out, it's holding the government accountable, it's raising issues on an everyday basis, and this is what it should be done. Right. Some of them are bringing legal action, so I think yes, they are doing their work.
Going somewhere. Talk to us about the direction. Where is this country going? We've seen that since last year, our HR reading has not been very good, to the extent that the government has hired a PR firm to clean up the international image. Where are we going? Is it going to become better or worse?
I think what will be most important is for government to address the issues which people are demanding for. And of course people will not get tired to demand for service delivery, for employment, for accountability. So what I see happening is that unless government does address those issues, it's going to grow and grow for people to demand more. And of course it has to address people's grievances too, issues of unemployment, issues of the right to health, the right to education. All those issues are what pertinent to the people. So what I think is important is for a government which is responsive to the demands of the people. That's what is usually, that's what governments are there for. You are responsive to the demands of the people, therefore you sit down and say, yes, people are saying this, what's happening? People are fighting corruption, and you know that corruption is a big issue. The government should sit down and say, how do we deal with corruption? And unless you do that, people will demand and demand. And therefore what I see is that the time will come to a time when the state has to respond, to be responsive to the demands of the people in a more holistic way.
Right now it's not responsive. The Ugandan government is not responsive to the demands of the people.
It's piecemeal. It's piecemeal. I think it's piecemeal. It should be more holistic.
Let's talk about corruption. What are they doing and what are they supposed to be doing?
I think we have the institution of the Inspector General of Government, which is mandated to investigate. We have cases which have been brought up, but at the same time we have problems that there are areas when you find that people are losing faith in institutions.
Yes.
And that's also a matter, as I said, for the government to address.
The people they keep are the people they don't keep, they let go?
No, I think what actually makes people to lose faith in institutions is issues of impunity.
Talk to us about impunity. Where is the government allowing impunity to persist in terms of corruption?
Well, I don't know why government allows it, but I say...
Where does it allow it? Give us some case studies here. We are here, we've seen what has been happening.
I know that most of the cases which have been initiated do not come to conclusion, hardly. Or they take a very long process. The prosecution.
The bicycles come. We're supposed to get some bicycles. The coconut dealer we tendered. You give a tender to a
You're already giving the examples. All right.
We never saw them.
So we need.
And the man dies, the one who's supposed to give the answers in his flat. Go on, madam.
No, what I'm saying is we need to fight impunity. If the population knows that the government is going to get head-on with the issues, prosecute the people, or even recover, they will get trust in that system.
Yeah.
But of course, if you take a year, 2 years, 5 years, and nothing has happened, you can see the way people are demanding and demanding more. So I think it's still, can we say, strengthen the institutions which are supposed to deal with those, for example, with corruption, strengthen them, make sure they are operating, they are operational. But I think the most important thing, as I said, is for a government which identifies the issues which are pertinent to the people,
yes,
and to respond accordingly.
What are some of the other issues? Term limits, is that a human rights thing or is it not? You are subject to term limits yourself. Talk to us about term limits in the government, the presidency.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a human rights issue or is it a democracy?
Let me give you an example. I've just been to Honduras now. And
in Latin America?
Yes, and their president serves only 4 years.
One term.
And the reason was...
That's very unfair. That place is good to be.
The reason,
only 4 years.
The reason is that they had gone through such a dictatorial period that they never wanted anyone to stay in power for long.
Why?
You see, every country, the history of that country matter. So what is the history of Uganda and what do we want as a people? But I think I participated in the drawing up of the Constitution. I was there researching and advising, and of course they had put term limits. Personally, I feel it's an issue which should be I think it should be debated.
But you know, you can get a good leader by chance and you want to keep that good leader. What do you do? Term limits can really tie your hands down.
You are really...
You don't have words for that.
Good leaders can be there, yes. But the principles also can be there.
Can get a good person like Nelson Mandela. They don't come easily and you want to keep them. What do you do with term limits? You remove them, so things continue going.
I think we should distinguish between a principle, a law, and wishes and practices.
All right. Maybe before we hear from the listeners, talk to us about some of the constants of your office. Are there other things that you are supposed you'd like to do that you cannot do because of certain contexts?
As a special rapporteur?
Yes.
Yes, as I told you, we do country visits, but sometimes states do not allow us to visit them, because when you are going to do a country visit, you must request the state. Some states have standing invitations.
The doors are open, you can show up anytime.
Yes, but others you have to request. And if you request, of course, sometimes we find that they don't agree. They don't say no right away, but they just say, we are not ready next year or the other year. So that's one aspect. The other one is when we issue communications, urgent appeals. Sometimes you might not get response from the states. Sometimes some states answer because they are supposed to investigate and give you a response. And maybe the other hurdle with the United Nations is that it's an institution which puts pressure on states, but they don't have the mechanisms, of course, of forcing states sometimes to do certain things. So it becomes difficult. You pass a resolution or a declaration,
you can't follow up on it,
but you find that the states will defy that.
All right. And you say some states block, they don't invite you. They refuse to invite you, or you ask to be invited and they don't shoot.
Some states.
All right. Well, this is Spectrum Radio 1. You can call in now. Our number 0414348111, 0312260390, 0312261390. When you call in, please tell us your name and where you are calling from. Madam Sekaggya, as we wait to hear from our listeners, are there any other mechanisms? First of all, your calling is global. Your mandate is global.
It is.
You cover the entire world. There's no other
global
person holding your office. It's not Africa. It's not East Africa.
No,
it's not to the third world.
It's worldwide. Then there are the treaty bodies, which also look at reports from states. There is another mechanism now which is new, the Universal Periodical Review, which reviews states and checks that.
It's an annual report, that one.
It's done every 4 years.
Every 4 years.
Every 4 years. So each state will be reviewed every 4 years, and then they will rotate and review other states. So that also looks at the human rights situation. And then the special procedures, as I said, you have the special rapporteur on human rights defenders, but you have other special rapporteurs, like on violence against women, trafficking in children, and all that. Independent experts on certain countries, like you have on Haiti, and then you have working groups.
Okay, let's hear from one of our listeners.
Hello, Radio 1.
Yes, sir, your name?
Yes, my name is Musinje.
Yes.
I appreciate what Madame Margaret is saying, yes, and I really feel that she's doing a very good job. But is there a way she can really pressurize government where she feels government is going wrong? Or is there any mechanism we can pass through, maybe through her organization she's heading, so that we can have justice being done, especially to what is happening today? Because if we are dealing with multi-party, and really we are seen as if we are in one type of party system, it's not right. Thank you very much.
All right. You can still call in. Our number 0414 348111 0312 26039 0312 261 All right, madam. Talk to us about some of the. Well, you can answer this question. Couldn't you put some more pressure, tighten the nuts a little bit?
As I said, we do a lot in our organization. You have to sensitize even government officials on issues of democracy, on issues of good governance. Civil society can even do more to understand multipartyism and what it means. It's a long journey. People somehow don't seem to understand what multipartyism
I salute you in the name of Almighty Allah.
Yes, sir, your name?
This is Nani other than Segirinya Muhammad from Kawempe, North Constituency. My comment today is just I made my going to thank to the madam, and I'm advising that let her come even in Kawempe and start teaching people. So sensitization, I think it can be a better solution in order people can get to sensitize, and not only in Kampala but even in different areas like in Masaka, Kampala. So I think it will be better so that people can get to know what they can do in order to fight against it, or in order people can get to know their rights. May God be with us, Segirinya.
All right, madam. Will you go to Kawempe?
Yes, you are right. We need to go there.
Okay, let's hear from another of our listeners. Spectrum, hello. Okay, go on, madam.
Yes, you are right. We need to come there. My group has actually covered the whole country. My staff, they've been to Gulu, Soroti, Mbarara, Masaka, Fort Portal. Right now they are in Luero. We are trying our best, and we are doing also Kampala. So, as I said, of course, it's very difficult to cover the whole country, but I do agree there must be a concerted effort by all civil society to reach out to the grassroots, to reach out to people to understand their rights. As I said, we even translated these documents. We want these people to understand their rights even much better.
Someone on the line, Spectrum, hello.
Yes, good evening. My name is Paul.
Yes, Paul.
In your introduction, you mentioned that one of the things that has affected Uganda's tourism is the response or the abuse of human rights, especially that came to work. But what I wanted to highlight is that I think there is a suppression of human rights as well as a very high level of brutality. What we have is an extreme level of brutality which is screened on TV and seen everywhere that causes people to really shy away. So I do think that it's true, countries may have suppression of human rights, but brutality is almost the limit of suppression of human rights. The second thing is I get the feeling that the country is almost becoming violent in itself. I don't know if our guest ever watches a newscast called Agatari Konfufu to see the level of communal violence, the way people react to anything that is offensive to them. So I think the drive is one, to start with the leadership of the country or the people in authority, but as well as the grassroots. I think we are at such a terrible state that anything can spark off extreme violence and abuse of human rights, both for criminals, non-criminals, oppositions, and all people at all levels. Thank you.
All right, let's get back to... Okay, we have another caller, Spectrum. Hello?
Edmond.
Yes, your name, my friend?
I wanted to know from the madam, what does she mean when she mentions the civil society? Thank you.
Okay, let's get back to you, madam. Talk to us about some of these callers' concerns.
One caller talked about sensitization of the people. I said I agree with that. We also need probably a big strategy and a lot of funding even from the government to strategize on how we can sensitize, do civic education, even put a budget for civic education starting from primary schools, tertiary institutions to the public. It's very, very important. And that actually comes to the other question of a violent public, because I think the public, it's true they are becoming violent. You see the mob
justice. They're learning it from official...
You see the mob justice. You
think they're learning it from what they see on television, the walk to work and so on? Do you think, or is it a long-term?
No. It's not only learning from what they see on television. It's a culture which we need to instill, a culture of peace, a culture of solving conflict, a culture of respecting law and order. It's a big strategy which we need, and Ugandans should not take this lightly. It's not a responsibility of one person like me or my organization. It's other organizations. Like we work with other civil society organizations like Foundation for Human Rights Initiative, we work with Eastern Phone, we work with Urinate, but even other people, other organizations, the Uganda Human Rights Commission, all those people need to have strong strategies on how to combat this. I think it's important that we take it as a responsibility that our population doesn't become violent. Our children don't see this violence because they will also grow up to be violent. We need to really work on it. And I think it's our responsibility, all of us.
And the government, they have a desk on patriotism, so they're probably moving on that as well.
And then the issue of tourism and how the walk to work has affected, I think, of course, a country which will flourish with tourism and all that has to perfect on all other areas of democracy, good governance, economic situation and all that. You can't have your cake and eat it.
You have to clean the house.
You have to clean the house.
Not
if
just
we want
the compound.
Tourism, we must make sure that we work hard, all of us, because we all want the tourists. In our little businesses which we do in wherever areas. So we need, first of all, even to stop the mob justice. If someone sees that mob justice, they might not come. So I think it's important that we really work on these issues.
Okay, give us some of the highlights of that. Well, somebody asked about civil society, very briefly. What is it? How do you define it?
Civil society is the space between government and the public, the people who
advocate on behalf of the general public.
Yes.
NGOs and so on.
Yes.
Talk to us about your achievements. As you sat in that office, you're still there 3 years?
Yes.
2 years? What are some of the things you've been able to do?
Oh, I've, for example, visited many countries. I was in Colombia, Congo, Togo, Armenia. Now I've just been to Honduras, India, and I've looked at their human rights record, presented reports to the Human Rights Council and General Assembly. I've done thematic reports which have been used to get resolutions on human rights defenders.
At the UN?
At the UN. I have done a lot of other things to really help human rights defenders widely. But at the local scene, my organization is doing a lot, as I told you, to bring the profile of defenders, to get people to recognize that they are human rights defenders, that they do useful work, they contribute to the democratization process.
And in the coming 2 years that you have left on your terms, bound by term limits, what do you expect to achieve in these 2 years that are left?
I want to do more. I want to do more for defenders, look at various issues, like, you know that the Arab Spring has brought up all this social protest and what. So I want to, it was a big challenge for my office when it came with the Arab Spring and social protests. I want to see how we can perfect on the freedom of expression and the use of social media.
You want more Arab Spring? What are you talking about?
No, I don't want Arab Spring. I'm saying I want to ensure that people understand how to use social media, because it's become a global issue.
They've used it badly in Tunisia, or what?
I'm not saying they've used it badly. I'm saying, how can we understand how to use social media for the good, for issues of democracy?
All right, we have to go. Our time is up. Thank you very much, dear guest, Madam Margaret Sekaggya, UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders, also Executive Director of the Human Rights Center in Uganda. Where are you found? How can people find you?
We are in Bugolobi, Lutsuli Avenue.
On the internet?
On the internet.
Human Rights Center Uganda.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for tuning in. I've been your host, Edmond Kizito. Spectrum will be back tomorrow. Up next is the news in English. Just stay tuned.
Thank you.
Promotion kutoka MTN.